All right, the Olympics has kicked off, opening ceremonies, and I love Olympics. And I don't know if I need to start changing that. Like, as I've gotten older, I'm not positive the Olympics are what I thought that they were. And it just comes from a respect standpoint from you guys. I'm not positive you respect the Olympics the way I do and the way I thought that you did. Now, I come from the world of wrestling, and the Olympics is the biggest thing we've got. And it has always been that way. And it would take a meaningful period of time for that to change, but I'm not sure that's the direction possibly that UWW and USAW should be going in, to create something that's bigger than the Olympics. And quite frankly, you have to wait so many years, put up with so much bureaucracy with. Now, a bit of a different conversation. Matt Lindland, one of the great characters and personalities that the MMA world never fully understood. When Matt was fighting and Matt was ranked #1 in the world, Matt was truly the best in the world. I was in that division. I was fighting those guys, right? I realize it's kind of an opinion, but I was in the practice rooms. I saw things that you wouldn't see. Like I saw fights that you couldn't get on pay-per-view. You know, teammate versus teammate, you couldn't get that on pay-per-view. I'll name drop for you. The late, great Evan Tanner, Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, Matt Lindland, Ed Herman, Chris Lieben, Nate Corey. These guys, Matt Horwich, Josh Haynes. I mean, I can just keep playing this game. These guys were in the same practice room every day, and then you rotate. BJ Penn in there, Rico Rodriguez, Boss Rutan, Don Fry, the Colossus, Jane Thompson came out and jammed with us. And, you know, these guys, as they would come through town, and I just saw these workouts that you could never get on pay-per-view, and I bring that to you. Matt Lindland was great, but social media wasn't here. And Matt Lindland and his gimmick, if you will, were made for social media. There was a story that needed to be told, and social media would have told it so well. Twitter wasn't a word. Facebook. I don't believe Facebook was there. No, for sure Facebook wasn't there. 2000, no. There was something called MySpace that came along a little bit later, but it was more difficult to get some of these stories out. And Matt was just made for a meme. It was one of these things where I tell you, one of these incredible characters and personalities that went right past you. There was a boilerplate for making a star back then. And you needed to fit within a certain mold, and that wasn't unique to MMA. Every organization was that way. Like prior to social media, Vince McMahon, to be over and to be a star, you had to have a certain look. You had to have a certain height and a certain physique to even get started. And that's different when you have linear TV and you have X amount of time. And the entire battle is fighting for those time slots. Whereas opposed to social media, you don't need anybody's permission. It's not on for an hour a week with commercial breaks, and you got everybody fight 24/7, and anyone can jump in. So Matt Lindland fought under the law. Called him Matt the Law Lindland. They would play that song. I fought the law and the law won. I fought the law and the law won. And one of the reasons that they went with law is Matt used laws to make an Olympic team. And this was one of the more interesting scenarios ever. So to make an Olympic team, you have the International Olympic Committee, and they set forth their rules, but then they give authority to each country that participates. Each country that participates will have a national governing body. So in America, that's called USAW, which just stands for United States of America Wrestling. That's it. But USAW will set forth our guidelines. Like if you were to go and hold a tournament, you could, and if you were to call it an Olympic trials, you could. Like you could get away with doing that, but it wouldn't be. If USAW doesn't recognize it, you're not even holding a wrestling match. It's one of these things, but it's pretty relevant that you understand that concept. because USAW set forth through bylaws and chapters and a board of directors what their process for making an Olympic team was. And you could actually go out and qualify for it, which I think is the only way to do it, but that's not the only way it's done. Look at the basketball team, for example, or look at the heat that Caitlin Clark had brought because the women's basketball team did not put Caitlin Clark on there. And that was a real thing in the basketball community. And I'm looking at it going, I don't understand this. There should be another group of 5 that challenges whatever team you want to put forth. And whoever has more points when time runs out, that's your team. And if you got 2 and 3 and 4 and 20 and 200 of these, then you have it in a tournament and you run this damn thing down until only one is left standing. Some people, like the basketball community, won't even fully understand what I just said. Like, that's just not how it's done. Okay. So, once you understand that process, we go out and it takes an entire year just to get us in wrestling to the final wrestle-off, to the final tournament, where whoever comes out of that becomes the Olympian. But it takes a whole year. You have anybody that wants to raise their hand and say, I can do it. Absolutely anybody. That's how we know that we have the best. There are no barriers to entry. And no one else can say that. State tournaments have barriers to entry. All sorts of things you have to do within your local high school to even be eligible. The NCAA, all sorts of barriers to entry. You got to have from the clearinghouse to your SAT score to how many credits you're earning towards graduation just to be eligible to get onto the mat to then go through that process. So when you look at the Olympic process, it is truly anybody that raises their hand. Anybody is eligible to fill out a form, step on a scale, and get to the bracket. Now, I really want you to appreciate that, because in wrestling, there is something known as getting caught. And if you get caught, you get pinned. You could be the better wrestler, and you could get pinned. And because wrestling wants to make sure that we put our best team together, for the final wrestle-off, they'll do it 2 out of 3, which at least in theory would cut down on the I was caught issue and produce your best athlete. All right. And now that I have you there, and now that you respect the process, Matt Lindland went to the final 2 out of 3. And he lost the very first match. He lost the very first match to Keith Saraki. It was a bit of a surprise. Now Saraki had beaten Matt before. It wasn't as though it was unheard of, but the previous 8 matches, Matt won. And of the 13 matches that they ever had, I believe Saraki had only won 1 of those. And if I'm wrong, he won 2. Okay. So Saraki takes him out, go back to the hotel, regroup, come back. It's 2 out of 3. Pressure's on Matt. And Matt beats him, and it is a dog fight. I mean, Keith Saraki showed up to play. And Keith was awesome anyway. He was awesome anyway. Even if he was behind Matt, he was awesome. Keith could beat anybody on any given day. He could be the Olympic champion on any given day. They go to the best of 3, the final, 3rd match. And there's a situation in Greco-Roman wrestling called parterre. That's where one guy's on top and one guy's on bottom, and the referee placed them in that position. Matt lifted Keith Saraki, and throw some Greco vernacular at you, but I'm trying to explain it for the common man. And Matt does a lift, which Matt was known for. He had lifted and been very successful with all his opponents, but including Keith Saraki a number of times. And Keith Saraki defends it. Now, here's where the entire question comes in, and I'm going to share it from my perspective. I'm in the stands cheering for Matt Lindland, sitting with my mom. And when Matt went to do this lift, the way that Keith defended it was with his legs. In Greco-Roman, you cannot do that. You cannot use your legs offensively or defensively. Keith used his legs in such a clear way that I turned to my mom and we did a quick celebration. Like, I turned to her and she's turning to me, and we both embrace. And this is before the action takes place. We see Keith do this, and we know that's going to be 2 points for Matt. Now, the way wrestling works is if you were fouled, if a violation like this with the legs takes place, Matt, the offensive guy, can still try to finish the hold. And if he succeeds, he'll get the points for the hold plus the 2 points for the caution, plus they will return them to that very position. So when Matt gets legged, I assume that Matt felt that it was leg. I thought it was bad. I thought it was so blatant. I literally turned to my mom and we celebrated. Matt then goes for the move. Keith counters it. Keith reverses it. So now, again, I am personally certain they're going to blow the whistle. They're going to bring them up. When I tell you that Matt Lindland can still finish the action, the defensive guy cannot come out on top if the offensive guy chooses to finish the action. Well, in this case, he did. And I could not believe it. And now all of a sudden, we don't get the 2 points, meaning Matt Lindland, and now Keith gets points. Like, this is match. You're not good. You're one of the top guys. If you have 1 point, it's enough. Somebody's not going to come back on you. There is ways to stop wrestling. It's actually probably one of the biggest problems with wrestling is you can't force two guys to wrestle. If one guy chooses to shut down, no wrestling takes place. Oh, and by the way, once you have the points that you need, you don't have to beat the guy anymore. All you have to do is beat the clock. Just run out the clock, and the top guys know how to do that. I'm just sharing with you, like, this is a very detrimental position. And the way that Matt began wrestling after that was like a guy that was desperate. It was no longer Matt versus Keith. It's a very different thing that we're watching. So as time is running out and things have gone from bad to worse for Matt Lindland, they lock up and Matt bites his ear. Now, to this day, Matt has never admitted he's bit his ear. Allegedly, he is alleged to have bite his ear. But it was filmed. I mean, it's filmed. And there was teeth marks, and there was blood. I mean, it was one of these situations that it was no more obvious that Mike Tyson bit Evander's ear than it was that Matt bit Keith. And I'm being very literal on that. There was nothing that was more obvious about that than there was this. But it's relevant that you understand that, because Matt, after the match, sued. He took this to court. It got all the way to the Supreme Court. And I bring up the ear bite, and I bring up the rest of the match, because there are people to this day that still have very sour grapes that the courts sought in favor of Matt Lindland, but it's because they're not understanding the rules. If you have a bad action, anything that happens after that goes into what's called bad time, because we should not even be there. Let me give you a great example. If somebody runs a red light and they T-bone you in traffic, they ran the red light, they did the infraction, they T-boned you, it is their fault, clearly. Hold on. But you had been drinking and they hadn't, it's your fault. If they T-bone you and you're out driving without insurance, it's your fault. If they T-bone you and you're not licensed, it's your fault. Why? How do you come to that conclusion? Well, because you weren't supposed to be there anyway. Whether they ran the red light or not, you were never even supposed to be there. So wrestling looks at it. I'm just giving you an example so that you will understand that if there in fact was a foul by Saraki, per the rules of wrestling, anything that happens that goes into what's known as bad time, so it doesn't matter anyway. You don't look at the match. You do not look at the match and decide, okay, this was an arm drag, that was a push out, that was one, okay, but he got it wrong here, but they got it wrong here, and that evens it out. No. Stop. Stop. Now, how are you going to address bad time? There is a history in wrestling, Randy Lewis versus Leroy Smith. Quite possibly the wildest decision made in the history of sport, literally, quite possibly. But what they did with those guys, they put 42 seconds on the clock and went and re-wrestled them. Completely fresh, completely different location, brought in referees, rolled the guys out, flew them out there, brought in their coaches, warmed them up, everything, had them go wrestle 42 seconds with a certain score on the board. They called it bad time. Well, nobody really knew how to handle that, as much of an injustice as I want to call it. At that time, they were doing their best they could to solve this issue. So with more time gone by in Matt Lindland's situation and so much up in the air, they just redid the entire match. Now, that in and of itself has a real argument to, was that the right way to do it? But either way, they redid the entire match. And it had gotten up to where the head official in all of America, Rick Tushy, weighed in on it in favor of Matt Lindland. He just said, yes, it was a leg foul and that should have been called. But while while that's one of the rules that it should have been called after the fact through an arbitration process, there's another rule within USA Wrestling of a referee's discretion, and you have the right to wrap it up. So I have just got to a black belt ceremony. I am going to watch my friend Nick possibly get elevated. Did my best to tell you guys that story, but Matt Lindland is an Olympic silver medalist after going through everybody in the world at the Olympics without winning the Olympic trials. Interesting riddle.